Hello and welcome to Dungeon. I'm your host Rob. In today's video I wanted to take a look at building an archer build. And usually when I do builds I take a look at a subclass and we try to figure out how to use the different abilities of that class and maybe combine it with different feats or racials or whatever else we have in order to, make a really solid use of that particular subclass and try to maybe get a little bit more out of it than usual. Today though I wanted to take a look at a concept of like building an archer, as you probably noticed in the title. But I think this works for a lot of things, maybe building a healer, building a blaster caster type of character. And I think a lot of times there are multiple ways to get a job done. So this video is probably going to be a little longer, but I just want to look at like 3 or 4 different build ideas. And we're not going to go super in depth into each one, but I'm going to talk about why I liked that idea and kind of what we're gaining from each one in particular. And so just to be, up front with it here, the ones we're going to look at are going to be 2 fighter builds, one being an Arcane archer and one being a samurai. A couple different ideas for ranger, possibly combining them with rogue. Not necessarily have to, but I do kind of like that idea. And I think all the rangers make pretty good options, but if your campaign is going to allow feats, then sharpshooter is it's just a go-to for any archery build. And because of that, and because of the fact that you can get that bonus damage per hit when you hit, I'm really favoring either the Gloomstalker for the extra attack in the first round, or actually the Hunter, so you could use something like Horde Breaker. And we'll talk about both of those options more in a second. The other one I wanted to mention, which yes, is mostly a meme build, but it is the Valor Bard, using one of your 10th level magical secrets to grab Swift Quiver. Do I think that's the best build out there? No, but it's not as bad as some people make it out to be, and I thought I'd at least talk about it, just because it's kind of funny and at least a little more original and creative than many of the other options out there. So if we start with the Arcane Archer, and just the fighter in general in fact, we've got a couple of really nice things going for us. Number one, fighters, you either need strength or dex if you want to multi-class in or out. This is a pretty easy choice. We're going to be using dex. And I don't think you have to multi-class with fighter in order to really, really get the most out of the class. Yeah, you maybe could get, a little bit more. But honestly, just going all fighter all the way is really, really solid. So the main things we're getting from the fighter, of course, are the fighting style. We're going to pick the archery fighting style, clearly. But we're also getting things like action surge. And I think that with all these different builds we're going to talk about, each one of them has like moments where they're maybe not as good as some of the others, but they also have level ranges where they really, really shine. And I think the fighters from levels 1 to 4, maybe not as strong as some of the others. You don't have the spells that the ranger would have or the bard would have, or some of the other advantages. Level 5, you're not too bad. But really, where the fighter starts to absolutely dominate in every case, no matter what fighter subclass you took, is from level 11 on. So if you're in a campaign where you have a reasonable chance of getting to 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, whatever, or higher, then the fighter really starts to look attractive. And a lot of this is because you get the third attack around, of course, and action surge just becomes even better. Action surge at level 2 is not bad, but if you have 1 attack, going to 2 isn't a big deal. When you have 3 attacks, going to 6 is a lot. If you have 4 attacks and you get to attack 8 times in a round, the damage is ridiculous. So I wanted to mention, I had in my last campaign, the White Spire campaign, we actually had one of the characters, or one of the players, Mike, started the campaign as a Storm Soul Sorcerer. There we go. But at one point he kind of started getting bored of the character, partly because the party also had a wizard and a bard. So when it came to full casters, they were in pretty good shape. So he decided he was going to make an Arcane Archer. And the damage this guy did was absolutely sickening. I mean, the campaign did go all the way to 20, so we did get to see, 20th level fighter making 4 attacks around. But at one point, I believe the party was 17th or 18th level, and they were fighting Bellatrix, the Widow of Lust, who I've mentioned in a couple other videos, because she was one of my more favorite NPCs. Basically, she's just this demon queen And as you can guess from a name like the Maiden of Lust, or the Widow of Lust, sorry, she has like 30 charisma. So she ends up mind controlling the Arcane Archer, who then turns around, shoots the party's wizard 3 times in a row, and drops the party's wizard, and then action surges, walks over to the wizard who's laying prone on the ground, bleeding out, and puts 3 more arrows into him, completely killing him. So in one round, the wizard went from, I think, full or almost full to completely dead. And of course, a lot of this was because he had, this is a 17th or 18th level wizard. Like, we're not talking about a first level wizard with, no hit points. I mean, yes, wizards have terrible hit points, but by 17th or 18th level, you're still looking at over 100 hit points easily. But, I mean, he had sharpshooter on every attack. He had his magic bow. He has his dexterity bonus. He was using magical arrows on top of that, so he's stacking the +2 or +3 bow with his +2 or +3 arrows and the dex bonus. It was just ridiculous, the amount of damage that he did. I believe he might have crit on one of the attacks as well, so that never really helps for the poor wizard. But the damage he did was absolutely sickening. The Arcane Archer, I don't want to go into, like I said, a lot of detail. The arcane shots are pretty nice. They give you some decent options. I will say that they're really, really good at like lower levels, but the scaling on them is very slow and rather poor. And that's not to say they're bad abilities, right? They give you a lot of flexibility. You can do some AoE damage, or maybe you can just change the damage types and stuff like that. There's a lot of really, really good abilities, but they really shine at low levels. And because the damage doesn't particularly scale well, they're not as good later on. But you do get Magic Arrow at level 7. Excuse me. Very nice. If you didn't have magic arrows, your arrows are now magical, right? Also, you get Curving Shot at level 7. And this was kind of a big one. If you're fighting somebody and you make like 3 attacks around, say you're level 11 plus, and you're using Sharpshooter, odds are you're going to miss more often because you're taking that -5 penalty for a Sharpshooter in order to get the +10 to damage, right? But if you did miss, you can use a bonus action to try to curve that shot into a different target. You can't hit the main target you're shooting at, but you can hit a different target. And yeah, you're kind of spreading your damage around a bit, but it's better than not doing any damage at all. And it really just gave him opportunities where, the number of times he'd roll a 1 and just auto miss, and then turn that into like a natural 20 on the curved shot and crit some other target. It was ridiculous. That character did just immense amounts of damage and was very, very good. However, I also wanted to mention the idea of possibly going Samurai. And I realized that Samurai might not be as intuitive of a choice, but here's the main reason why you might want to go Samurai. And that's because at level 3, you get Fighting Spirit. So as a bonus action on your turn, you can give yourself advantage on weapon attack rolls until the end of the current turn. When you do so, you also gain 5 temporary hit points. Nice, but not really while we're using it. And the number of hit points also scales. You can use this feature 3 times, and you regain all expended uses when you finish a long rest. So 3 times per day, you can give yourself advantage on every attack you make that round. So let's take that same idea of a fighter who's in the 11 plus range. You're making 3 attacks a round. You decide to action surge, and you use Fighting Spirit. You're now making 6 attacks with your bow with advantage using Sharpshooter, and the damage is insane. Oh, I should also point out, all these builds I would recommend taking Sharpshooter. But I want to say, I've seen people, especially online, where they say that, if you don't have feats, there's no point taking an archery build because you can't take Sharpshooter. I completely disagree with that. That would be like saying that, we don't have feats, so there's no point taking great weapons, or we don't have feats, so there's no point, playing a cleric because now I don't have Warcaster, so if I get hit, I'm going to lose concentration instantly. Feats allow you to make your character better and stronger in certain areas, but with only a few exceptions, they usually don't change the way you play your character entirely. And Obviously, having all that extra damage from a sharpshooter is a huge bonus, and I would definitely take that as a feat on all of these builds, because all of them are going to feature characters with multiple attacks around. But if you don't have feats available, that's okay. You also might want to take things like, in a previous video I did one on like the idea of combining like rogue with fighter or ranger, for example, right? Especially champion fighter. You can only take 3 levels of champion fighter. That's going to double your crit chance. Use the aim option as a bonus action on every turn, and then you just fire your arrow with advantage, and now you crit on a 19 and 20, and mostly you're just trying to get a sneak attack. That's a great idea for an archer character who does not rely on multiple attacks per round and doesn't really need sharpshooter, because sharpshooter really starts to benefit when you're getting, lots of hits per round. In the example we just gave of our samurai, 6 attacks, or even 4 level 5 plus, 4 attacks around with that 40 damage from a sharpshooter, which is probably going to hit because you're attacking with advantage. You've got the archery fighting style, you've got a decent dex, at least 3 of them are going to hit, and that's 30 extra damage, right? So it really starts to multiply on top of each other. But that's not the only way to build an archer. So I just wanted to, be clear on that before we go. And we'll talk about some other feat choices as well, especially if you're just going pure fighter all the way. It doesn't take that long to max your dex. You've got more ability score increases than anyone else in the game, and picking up extra feats to help you be even better is, easy to do as a fighter. So that's the main advantage to the samurai. Some of the other abilities are nice too, but the fact that you can just give yourself advantage on all your attacks, especially if you combine it with your action surge, it's huge benefits. I will also say, specifically for this build, in addition to sharpshooter, you may want to consider going with an elf or half elf, but I would probably just go like full elf for the +2 to dex, right? Nothing wrong with that. And taking as another feat choice the elven accuracy feat, because this is basically, it's not technically rolling 3 dice when you have advantage instead of 2, but it basically is. You roll with advantage, you can re-roll the lowest one. So basically, instead of rolling 2 dice with advantage, you're essentially rolling 3 dice with advantage. And because you can give yourself advantage, you're never gonna miss almost. It's insanely good. And it also gives you a +1 to one of those, like either dex, wisdom, intelligence, or charisma. Obviously, we're probably gonna take dex, but it's definitely a strong choice. And because you have a way of giving yourself advantage often, I figured I'd at least mention it. So that covers both of the main fighters. I think that they're both incredibly good. They kind of have that like just Gatling gun approach where you just fire a lot of arrows, combine that with your dex bonuses, your sharpshooter if it's available, your magic item bonuses if you have a magical bow and maybe magical arrows on top of that, and the damage is absolutely insane. And I really like both of them. I really don't know which one's better. We've had samurais in one of our campaigns as well, and that guy was just a machine. In fact, that guy was also played by Mike. Mike and the Fighters, just crushing stuff. But he was like a dual wielder fighter, and he was very, very good as well. So I never got to see him use a bow, but samurai was just a really, really good subclass. So next I wanted to mention ranger. And like I said, I think most of the rangers are really good. And if you don't have feats, I think a lot of the other rangers start to look really, really good. But if you are having sharpshooter available, I do like the idea of just getting that extra attack. And Gloomstalker can be quite nice. I think that Hunter can be pretty good as well. Like I said, you can use Horde Breaker, get an extra hit, and that extra attack just gives you an extra opportunity to apply sharpshooter damage. And it's not just sharpshooter. It's like I said, it's also your weapon damage, it's your dex bonus, it's everything else on top of that, right? It's just an extra attack. And, in Gloomstalker's case, you're only getting that extra attack in the first round, but that extra attack does an extra 1d8 damage as well, so, nothing wrong with that. And the first round of combat is kind of the most important. The Gloomstalker can also tunnel down one particular target a little better because you're not forced to spread your damage to a second target the way the Hunter is, but the Hunter can use that ability round after round as long as there's a second target within 5 feet of that primary target. So he might be able to get more play out of that ability over more rounds of combat, right? He also gets volley at level 11. I don't know if you want to go that high with the ranger. I do find that because rangers and paladins kind of fall into this category as well, but we're not really talking about paladins. But all the half casters, they tend to be very front end loaded. You get spells fairly early. Level 2 is not bad. You've got some nice options there. A lot of the low level paladin and ranger spells are really, really good as well. And they're a really nice bonus to your kit. By level 5 though, you've already got extra attack, just the same as a fighter or a barbarian would have, so you're not falling behind there. I find the problem tends to be that they just don't really keep up as well. You're not getting a third or even a fourth attack around like the fighter is. You're not getting all the brutal critical die and extra rage damage, for example, that a barbarian is. And you're not progressing in your spells as fast either as a pure caster would be. And this is one reason I like to kind of switch out of those classes after a certain point, And that might be level 5 or 6, it might be level 10 or 11, whatever it is I might be looking for, right? And I like Rogue as a nice option here, just because you can get expertise on a few things. You could maybe get like an uncanny dodge or an evasion, depending on how many levels of Rogue you got. And of course, you've got some sneak attack damage. So, nothing wrong with that. It's only going to be applied to one attack in the round, but that's okay. If we went with, say, just as an example, the Gloomstalker, that means that first hit, the first round of combat, you're getting that extra attack. That extra attack is doing extra damage. If that was your sneak attack, it's getting a bunch of damage on top of it. And it really allows you to just do a bunch of damage up front in that first round of combat, which, let's face it, that's kind of the most important round. If you can drop the number of incoming attacks, it lowers the damage your party's taking. That saves you resources. You're not having to heal as much. You're not having to use a lot of your other spells. You're not having to use hit dice after combat and rest as often. Just the more damage you can prevent, the better you're going to be. And, one way to prevent the damage is to just kill things faster. Not the best way. Crowd control is usually a much more effective method. But, you're a ranger and a rogue. Crowd control isn't really your specialty. But doing lots of damage is. So that's the basic concept there, right? Again, I would suggest, not necessarily that you don't have to do it this way, but if you wanted to go with Elf, then obviously the Elven Accuracy feat starts looking pretty good here as well. Just, you can use the aim action as a rogue and give yourself advantage that way, and then you use your Elven Accuracy to give yourself triple advantage, essentially, right? Or, super advantage, let's call it that. And I think that's very, very solid as well. Finally, we get to the Valor Bard, and this is really kind of a meme build that people made a while ago on the internet, but there are certain things I really like about it. Oh, I should have mentioned Swift Quiver for the Ranger too. One reason not to multi-class out a Ranger might be because if you know your campaign is going to go high enough, you could get Swift Quiver, which just gives you an extra couple of attacks every round. They do use your bonus action, I believe. I should have looked up the spell and reread it just in preparation of this video, but I believe it's 2 extra attacks as a bonus action. And, that is pretty awesome, to be honest. So I think that that's a very solid reason. But one thing about the Valor Bard, you're getting an extra attack. It's at level 6 instead of 5, so not quite as good as the others, but not tragically so. But you could take your magical secrets at level 10, and you could grab Swift Quiver, and you're getting it way faster than the Ranger would get it. Now, there are a lot of advantages to the Bard, but there's also some very big disadvantages. Unlike the fighters and the Rangers, you're not going to have access to the archery fighting style unless you multi-class into fighter or ranger, right? And if you do that early, that's delaying your extra attack even further. I'm not saying that's necessarily a bad move. I mean, you could pick up 2 levels of fighter, for example, and get archery and get action surge. But even if you do action surge, bear in mind that Swift Quiver are bonus action attacks, so you're only going to be doubling your main attacks, which is still, 2 attacks around. That's going to give you 4 plus the potential of a couple bonus action attacks, If, let's say you went Gloomstalker, for example, you could even do something like attack in the first round, then action surge, cast Swift Quiver, and now you're in pretty good shape to make more attacks or whatever else, right? So there are a lot of things you could do like that, and I don't think that's awful either. It means you'd have to have Gloomstalker, and you'd have to have Fighter, and you'd have to have Bard. Now you're looking at a lot of different dips in this character, but I mean, not the worst thing ever. I do think that the Bard definitely doesn't seem to be as good in other ways too, though. And part of that is because until you get to level 10 and get Swift Quiver, you're vastly inferior as an archer to the other classes. And this is mostly because, you're not getting like the fighting spirit that the samurai got. You're not getting things like the curving shot and all of the arcane abilities that the arcane archer gets. You're not getting, the extra attacks that the ranger could be getting, like from the Gloomstalker or the hunter. You're not getting things like, things like a hunter's mark. It's a very nice spell at low levels, especially if you don't have much else to do as a bonus action, And so before that, you're just nowhere near as good. I do think, though, that from a certain point of view, if you wanted to play a character, maybe you're not as worried about being the greatest archer on the planet, right? Maybe you're playing a character and you're like, I really like bards, I want to be a pure caster, but I also want to be able to do some damage. And if you played a lot of D&D, you start to realize that cantrip spam kind of sucks. Like, cantrips don't really do a lot of damage, but if you're doing a lot of like deep dungeon runs and stuff, you kind of have to like be careful with some of your spell slots. You may not be able to rest all the time. You might be having 8 or 10 encounters before resting instead of 2 or 3 or whatever, right? And if you're like, I want to play a bard, I want to have some buffs and some debuffs and some heals and some nice crowd control effects, but instead of hitting people with cantrips, I'm just going to shoot them with a bow. And being a bow bow user may not be my primary thing as the bard. Maybe I'm going to be using spells, but I cast my spell that I'm concentrating on, but I don't want to get hit. So I use a bow, I stand way back, and I shoot guys. And once I'm concentrating on that spell, there's not a lot of other really good spells I can cast because most of those are going to require concentration. So I just hit away with the bow. And then when I get to level 10, I can grab Swift Quiver, and now I've got that to concentrate on. And now my damage goes up quite a bit. And I don't think that's necessarily a bad way to go. It's just that from 1 to 9 is going to be a rough stretch. And if you multi-class or you start grabbing things from other classes, that's going to be a little rougher even still. You're not going to have the archery fighting style, like I said, which makes it a little harder to use sharpshooter. It's not required by any means, but a +2 just static bonus to all your attacks is really good, especially when you're combining it with the -5 penalty. It gives you another way of helping to compensate for that and just ensure that you're landing those big hits. So I do think that the bard can be good. It's just it's definitely a lot less intuitive, and it definitely requires a lot longer to come online. But once it's there, I think it's very, very solid. Is it still better than, say, a fighter who at the next level, 11, is going to have 3 attacks around all the time every round and isn't going to have to use spells like Swift Quiver, which you don't have a lot of spell slots at that point, to try to do more damage? The fighter might still be better off, but the fighter doesn't have the pure spellcasting progression that the bard has. So I do think that there's an argument to be made, especially if you're more focused on being like a generalist, but you also but bard damage kind of sucks, and this is a nice way to kind of get around that. I think that's a perfectly valid option. So I think all these builds are pretty good, including like I mentioned, some of the rogue ideas like champion rogue blend very well together. But I already did a video on that one. I wanted to say, in addition to sharpshooter and elven accuracy, there are other feats the person could be taking. Crossbow expert is a very solid choice. Crossbow expert does not just apply to crossbows. It applies to any range attacks where somebody's melee range. So, unless you went Scout, which by the way is not a bad choice. I should have mentioned that. If you're going to multi-class with Rogue, Scout becomes a good option. If somebody ends within 5 feet of you, you can use your reaction after they've finished their movement and their attack or whatever else they're doing to move half your movement away without triggering opportunity attacks. So if somebody is on top of you and they're trying to beat on you with that great axe, you can use your reaction and just back out again. So, things like Crossbow Expert are a lot less required there. But some of the others, you may not have that option, right? So something like Crossbow Expert can be very nice. I like Alert. It's just a great feat in general. I especially like it if I decide to go Assassin instead of, say, Scout as a rogue choice. At level 3, if your Assassin's acting before your enemies have acted in combat, you can just give yourself advantage, which means you can always sneak attack on those attacks. And, Alert for the +5 to your initiative bonus, combined with the fact that you've already got a pretty nice initiative bonus, is pretty strong. So I think that becomes a very nice combination as well. I think Alert's good on any of these, but especially if you're going, say, like the Ranger Rogue combo, I think that Alert starts looking a little stronger than it would in some of the others. Just be aware that if you're multi-classing in some of these other builds, you will possibly have less feat choices available. And if you want to take Sharpshooter and max out your stats, well, that's another thing I should have mentioned with the poor Bard, is that if you really want to be a good archer, you're going to need high dex. But you're also a pure caster, and at the lower levels where you don't have Sharpshooter, or you don't have Swift Quivers, you're not a very good archer, you're probably going to need to land some spells, and that means you're going to need Charisma too. If you look at the fighter, not only does the fighter have more ability score increases than everybody else, but they really only need dex, and then they can put all the rest into feats. Yeah, they might want some con or some wisdom and stuff. Not saying they don't want other stats. I'm saying that in order to play the build, the only things you really need are dex and then possibly feats if those are allowed in your campaign, right? So the fighter can just streamline all the way through. The Bard has a lot more difficulty with that kind of stuff. Overall, I really like the idea of trying a ranged samurai. That sounds like a lot of fun to me, just using a bow and giving myself advantage a lot of times, and filling people with arrows. That sounds like a lot of fun. Lucky's not a bad choice either. Help turn misses into hits. You roll that 1 and you're like, I'm just going to re-roll that thing. Oh, 18, good. When you're hitting pretty hard, re-rolling those misses can really start to add up. So I think that Lucky's just always a great feat in general, right? If you're taking, maybe you're wearing medium armor, you might want medium armor mastery, giving you, that extra point of dex added to your armor class. It does start to look a lot better than, say, light armor, for example, right? You can have the higher armor class from the medium armor, and now you've got the extra one from your dex. A lot of times it ends up turning into a +2 over what the other one would have been. But you've already got enough feats on the table at this point to worry about. To scale back a little bit. Anyways, those are my main thoughts on it. There's lots of other ways to build an archer as well. This is by no means the only ways to do it, but I just wanted to kind of throw out some different ideas there and discuss, a wider range of options than what I normally do in a video, where I'm normally focused on 1 or 2 specific ideas, right? And like I said, I think all of them sound fun, all of them seem cool. I should point out, I've never seen the Valor Bard build in actual gameplay, whereas, Rangers and all the different types of fighters we've seen, like I said, I didn't see a ranged samurai, but I have seen samurai, and I've seen arcane archers, both in my games. And all of them were just excellent. They did truckloads of damage. They performed even better than you might expect. So, no concerns there, really. The Bard just sounds fun, although a little ridiculous. So, but I wanted to throw it out there. Give people a different option they may not have heard about or thought about. Anyways, that's going to be the video. Thank you for watching. Feel free to subscribe, ring the bell, like, all that kind of stuff. And of course, most importantly, leave me your comments. I also wanted to say, as we creep higher in the subscription count, I really want to do like maybe different milestones, like perhaps when I hit 1,000 subs and 5,000 and 10,000, etc. When we hit these different milestones, I would love to run like maybe like 1 or 2 shot campaigns for some of my subscribers. And I think that that'd be a lot of fun. We'd probably just do it over Discord or whatever. And I just think it'd be kind of a fun way to be like a little more interactive, even on top of comments, of course, with some of the subscribers and the people who watch the channel. And I think that'd be a neat kind of goal to have, you know. So, you know, feel free to maybe tell a few of your friends to subscribe and help us get to that 1,000 mark a little sooner. Anyways, that's everything. Thank you for watching. Bye.